A very good afternoon. Welcome to another session. It's like almost the third day of this sessions here. So welcome to another session of the online literature class of third years, BA third year, semester 6. And I'll be dealing with academic writing. So in the previous session and the previous class, we were talking about the descriptive writing. And we just started with writing an argumentative essay. Right. So this is basically unit 5 of block 2. So what is an argumentative essay? So basically, so what is the difference between an argumentative essay and a descriptive essay? All these points we're going to look into in today's session. So this is unit 5, writing argumentative essay. So now coming to the point. So what is an argumentative essay? How does this essay called, why is it so called an argumentative one? So it's again a form of academic writing where the writer takes a clear position on a topic and uses logic, evidence, and reasoning, includes counter arguments. So here I just wanted to kind of give you a small narrative thing in this. So in Thomas More's frame narrative Utopia, where it was written in 1515, that illustrates an imagined ideal community, a city dweller of Utopia, reveals to the readers that one of the greatest accomplishments of their utopian society is that the citizens can openly discuss and debate various perspectives respectfully. So the utopian belief is that through argumentation, the ultimate truth can be found. So arguments are not personal rants. They are perspectives based on certain evidence. And they can be beliefs, but formulated only after a careful analysis of various aspects of an issue that lead to the formulation of the particular beliefs. Now, in our everyday discourses, we argue, we agree, and we disagree with people. So it is important to identify the ways in which one can argue respectfully and effectively with the help of evidence obtained through observation, experience, or sometimes experiments. So now let me just tell you what an argumentative essay is all about. So it is, an argumentative essay takes a strong stance on an issue with which the writer endeavors to persuade the readers to understand through providing a thorough reasoning by sustaining the writer's standpoint of view with carefully chosen and analyzed evidence. In this, the writer proves that his or her opinion, assumptions, or postulation about a particular issue or a set of issues is more accurate and truthful than those of others. So in other words, when you write an argumentative essay, you present your arguments and argue with the help of substantial evidence that your perspective or take on the issue is more correct than that of others. So this genre demands the writer to investigate the subject matter carefully, collect ample data in support of the argument to be presented, and analyze the obtained data to figure out ideas which can be used for substantiating the formulated argument. Now, moving on to the next slide. See, this is what I told you the purpose is. Now, the purpose of an argumentative essay is what? To organize and present your well-reasoned conclusions in order to persuade the audience to accept or at least seriously consider your point of view. Now, when we talk about this argumentative essay, there are two models in this called the Tolman and Rogerian models. They are actually two different ways of structuring an argumentative essay. Now, both of these aim to persuade, but they differ in tone, structure, and strategy. Now, let us talk about the Tolman model first. Now, it is developed by a philosopher, Stephen Tolman. Now, this model is logical and evidence-based. It breaks an argument into clear parts. So, what are the key components of this? One is your main argument, claim your main argument. Then the evidence, facts supporting the claim. Then the warrant, that is the reasoning connecting claim and evidence. Then backing, additional support is required. Then qualifier, that is limits of the claim. Then rebuttal, counter argument and response. So this is the Tolman model. Now, a few more, I would like to kind of give you an example on this. See, for example, if I chose a topic like online learning is more effective for slow learners. So in terms of Tolman style, the claim would be online learning improves reading skills among slow learners. Now the data, studies show personalized pacing increases comprehension. What is the warrant here? Slow learners benefit when they can learn at their own speed. Now, what is the backing? I'm trying to figure it out here. Educational psychology supports individualized learning. The qualifier is, this is true in most cases where proper guidance is provided. Now, if I talk about the rebuttal round, some argue face-to-face teaching is better, but online tools offer adaptive support not available in traditional classroom. So if you look at this approach, it is structured, analytical, and direct. Right? This is the Tolman model. Now moving on to the next, Rogerian model. Now what is this Rogerian model? Now this is actually based on the ideas of a psychologist, Carl Rogers. Now this model focuses on understanding both sides and finding a common ground. Right? So what are the key features of this? It begins with neutral tone at first, and it presents opposing views fairly and seeks compromise or middle ground, avoids aggressive or confrontational language. So if at all you want me to quote, I can give you an example on this Rogerian model. Now let me tell you, this is a model which is useful for sensitive or controversial topics, where agreement is more important than winning the argument. Now, for example, online versus traditional teaching for slow learners. Introduction. Both online and traditional teaching methods have strengths in improving reading skills. Opposing view. Traditional classrooms provide direct teacher support and structured guidance, which many educators value. Then your view. However, online learning allows flexibility and individualized pacing, which can benefit slow learners. Now, common ground. Both methods aim to improve student outcomes and can be effective when used appropriately. Now, conclusion is a blended approach combining online tools with teacher guidance may be the most effective solution. So if you have noticed, what is it you can figure out is nothing but this approach is balanced, respectful, and conciliatory. So let us quickly have a look at the differences between these two. Now, when I talk about the Tolman model, it is logical, evidence heavy. Whereas Rogerian model, it is balanced, compromise oriented. When coming to the tone of it, It is direct and argumentative. Whereas Rogerian model is calm and non-confrontational. Focus of Tolman model is proving your claim, whereas in Rogerian model, it is finding common ground. Then coming to the structure, the Tolman model has fixed components, that is the claim, warrant, etc. Whereas in Rogerian model, it is flexible discussion of both the views. Next, the goal here in Tolman model is convince the reader. Whereas in Rogerian model, it is to build agreement, that is respectful acceptance of opposition. So here, and when and where should we take up these argumentative, these types of argumentative essays? Like use Tolman for academic essays, research papers. Whereas Rogerian model for debates, social issues, conflict resolution, writing. So this is how we start with writing part of an argumentative essay. Make your reasoning clear to yourself. I mean, you should be convinced before you go ahead convincing others in this argumentative essay. Before you write your final draft, you have to make your reasoning clear to yourself, state your ideas step by step before trying to draw the conclusion. There has to be evidence for each premise and an explanation of how you arrived at your conclusion. So here the features which go into this argumentative essay are clear thesis, that is the clear idea, logical structure, evidence-based, formal tone, and critical thinking. Then the purpose here for the argumentative essay is to convince the reader, develop critical thinking, analyze evidence, present balanced views. Now, what are the various stages in this argumentative essay? They are pre-writing, drafting, and post-writing. Right. What is it in pre-writing stage? That is, choose the topic and research thoroughly on the topic and gather evidence. A lot of resources have to be researched. Then gather evidence. Evidence for the topic or the thesis statement, right? And form a thesis. Then create outline. This is all the pre-writing stage. Now the techniques. How do you kind of gather information by, researching a lot of literature, right? First and foremost, you can zero down on your topic by brainstorming, mind mapping, pros and cons, and critical questions. So these are some of the important pre-writing techniques. Now, coming to the strategy, that depends on audience. So which steps you take toward the conclusion of your argument depends on your audience and the goals you have for your writing. Next, the act of arguing in academic writing is the act of entering a conversation by Graf and Birkenstein, as quoted by Graf and Birkenstein. In any conversation, you need to know what others have said before you can respond. The same is true in academic writing. You have to establish for your readers what has been said about your topic before asserting your own claims about it. Now, next we have the drafting stage. So from the pre, we have come down to the drafting stage. So if at all, if you have worked reasonably well in the pre-writing stage, the drafting stage is an easy one. So you need to have your data sheet and the plan in front of you when you draft your essay. Now for this, you have to take up one model that suits your argument. So that is the two models which we discussed, the Tolman and the Rogerian, right? So you may follow the Tolman model or the Rogerian model. Now, if you're following the Tolman model, you have to choose the approach that you would like to adopt. So depending on the approach, you will devise the paragraphs. And please remember the importance of coherence. Each paragraph should have a central idea. Ideas must be presented coherently so that the individual paragraphs in the essays do not become standalone entities. Now, within the paragraph, there should be cohesion. So you have to make use of transition, vocabulary, or cohesive devices like discourse, markers. Now, write an introduction. So in the drafting stage, write an introduction. Now, the introductory paragraph, that is nothing but the first paragraph, which is very important to set the context, should carry the major argument. The thesis statement must be clear, concise, and well structured. Now, after the context is established, the essayist has to emphasize on the importance or relevance of discussing the issue. So the thesis statement would follow the substantiation of the relevance of the issue. So then comes the body. Now, when the arguments are presented along with evidence, it is also important to state how and why the evidence supports the major thesis. So, after developing the body, in the body, you are also supposed to add the evidence. Then include the counter arguments. Now, once you encounter a counter argument, because these cannot be excluded. It's quite unethical, the counter argument. So once you encounter a counter argument, which you cannot outwit through any argumentation. So you have to accept it as one shortcoming of your stance. So, but please remember to showcase other arguments in support of your thesis. Now, after the counter arguments comes the conclusion. Now, please remember the conclusion part is required for an argumentative essay, as the purpose of the essay is to convince the reader about the correctness of your perspective. Now, you should not just reproduce all the arguments. Conclusion is not just a summary. You have to synthesize the arguments in the light of the evidence you have provided through your research. Now, you may offer some suggestions too in this part, which would ideally enable the readers to carry on researching or reading about the issue that you presented and the stance that you have taken. So here goes the structure of the essay, the introduction, the thesis, body, counter argument, and conclusion that we have discussed in the previous slide. So when you talk about the body paragraph, it is what all things it comprises: topic, sentence, evidence, explanation, link to thesis. Now, post-writing stage, that is like you have finished writing the drafting of the essay, then you have to read, reread, proofread, and edit your essay for language feature as well as for logical coherence. Now, checking coherence and cohesion is the most important aspect of this argumentative essay. Now, if the paragraphs lack cohesion and coherence, the essay will read like a loosely constructed opinion record. Even if you have a strong argument and evidence to validate the thesis statement, if you do not carefully present them by using the most suitable transition words, your essay will bore the readers. So once you finish your draft, first draft, go through it rigorously to identify any issues in cohesion and coherence. Then coming to the proofread, you should check your first draft to find out spelling errors, grammatical errors, and lexical ambiguities. Sometimes even structural ambiguities may occur. You may have to make, you may, kind of make certain errors there, but make sure that the errors are checked and meaning which is conveyed is clear. Now, you might even ask another person whom you think is capable of offering you suggestions to proofread the draft. Now, coming to the editing part of it, which is required multiple times till your final draft is ready. You may offer a couple of times of proofreading, decide to reorganize the paragraphs or restructure ideas within a paragraph. You may add or delete information from the essay. Be bold enough to trim your essay if your editing sense finds any redundant information. Formatting your essay is also important. All the data that you collected through research and literature review must be duly acknowledged using APA or MLA style of referencing. So when you are editing, kindly check, is the thesis clear? That is the points which we have discussed just now about the coherence and cohesion. Logical arguments, how about the arguments? Are they logical? Strong evidence, does the evidence support? Is it quite strong enough to prove your claim? Grammar, is it correct? The structures and all need to be checked. The common mistakes which we often tend to do while writing this argumentative essay, that is the weak thesis. The overall idea itself is very weak. I mean, doesn't weak as in you will not be able to take a stance about what, I mean, the idea is not very clear about it. Lack of evidence. Now, when you take a stance and try convincing the reader, there should be a proper evidence, and without which it fails to convince the readers. Then poor organization. Well, the material has to be structured properly, organized well, and the informal tone. This being an academic writing, the tone is always expected to be a formal one. So here the tone being informal may not be convincing. Be clear, use credible sources, authentic sources. So when you come across a source, make sure it is genuine, authentic, and credible. Stay objective. Don't deviate from what exactly you would like to prove, and revise. That is very important. So, in conclusion, argumentative writing builds reasoning and communication skills. So when you plan to take up these one of these models, so brainstorming, mind mapping, note making are some of the strategies that can be adapted to plan and organize the argumentative essay. The essay should analyze the topic carefully and strongly establish a stance. Now, this requires evaluating the data gathered. A good argumentative essay is not emotionally driven, but data driven. Now we are moving on to Unit 6. So in Unit 6, we have analytical essay. Right. So what is an analytical essay? It is an essay where you critically analyze the subject matter. That is, you break it down into its components. You read something, you analyze something, means that you break it down into its components and carefully examine them. So in other words, in an analytical essay, the writer chooses a topic or an issue and carefully examine various aspects of it and interpret the issue in the writer's own perspective with the help of evidence collected through the review of literature or other investigations done. So the data to support the writer's argument will be extracted from reliable sources. Now, usually this type of an essay is an interpretation of an event, or it could be of a book, poem, play, or any other work of art. So, however, you need to understand that writing an analytical essay, examining a literary work, or a scientific topic is not about summarizing the important tenets. It is about formulating your own viewpoint while you also consider other arguments about the chosen topic. Now, in this type of writing, you have to go beyond the surface level interpretation and think critically to extract multiple perspectives on the matter. So here, these kind of essays dissect a topic into multiple components. They criticize them, analyze them, interpret them, and finally synthesize the data to formulate a conclusion on the subject matter. So here, the subject of an analytical essay can be a literary or an artistic piece, such as a poem, play, or a painting, certain event or a situation. So an elaborated dissection of the subject matter is done in an analytical essay through careful analysis of the components. So, for example, I can quote about one of the poem, or if one has to analyze a poem, the essayist will examine the rhetorical devices. So, these are certain things which a person is supposed to be taking up when he's analyzing a poem, like the rhetorical devices used in the poem, the historical or the political or the cultural background in which the poem was produced, and such similar aspects. So this is how it answers how and why. So for example, instead of describing social media, you analyze how social media affects students' concentration and productivity. So what is the purpose of analytical writing? It explores deeper meaning and it evaluates ideas critically, develops logical conclusions. So, for example, analyze why students using social media frequently score lower grades. Now, this is all about the analytical essay. So, basically, what is the difference between an argumentative essay and an analytical essay? So, analytical essays also present the argument or a major thesis of the writer on a specific issue or topic, but it is different from argumentative essays. Unlike argumentative essays, analytical essays do not intend to influence the reader's opinion on the discussed subject matter. So there is no element of persuasion. Or, in other words, the diction of an analytical essay is free from or free of persuasive devices. Now, these analytical essays attempt to present a point of view with objectivity to the reader and do not persuade the learners to be convinced to accept the perspective of the writer. In an analytical essay, the writer provides as many examples and evidence as possible to justify the viewpoint and that is being discussed or examined. Now, let us look into the structure of analytical essay. It has introduction, thesis statement, body paragraph, evidence and analysis, conclusion. And when we talk about the stages of writing analytical essay, we also have a pre-writing, drafting, post-writing, similar to the argumentative essay. right? All these three stages we have. I think we will come across in the next slide. So, for example, if we take up climate change, the introduction is the issue pertaining to the climate change. Now, in the body, we come across the causes, the effects, the solutions. The conclusion would be the insights. Now, here the thesis statement is nothing but the central idea of the essay, which is going to talk about what, how, and why. Now, if you feel the thesis is weak, just look up for what makes it appear to be the kind of not very suggestive or strong. If it is supposed to be a strong analytical thesis, it should be specific, analytical, clear claim. An example of a weak statement could be technology affects students, but instead, in a strong thesis could be excessive smartphone uses. Smartphone use reduces students' attention span by promoting multitasking and distraction. Example of thesis statement: pollution is bad. So this is weak. The statement thesis itself is quite weak. Now, urban air pollution increases respiratory diseases due to industrial emissions and vehicular traffic. Types of analytical thesis. There are different types of analytical thesis like cause and effect, compare and contrast, thematic. Now, when I talk about the cause and effect, why climate change occurs. When I talk about the comparison, online versus offline learning effectiveness. An example for thematic, theme of isolation in modern literature. Next, coming to stages of writing, pre-writing, drafting, post-writing, where if we take up AI in education as a thesis statement, pre-writing would be research all the AI tools. Then drafting, write the arguments, post-writing, edit clarity. So in pre-writing stage, select the topic, research a lot about that topic and develop the thesis. Online learning, for example. So you need to research a lot on student engagement data. Then form thesis on effectiveness. To what extent it is effective. Drafting stage, write introduction, develop body, add evidence, and claim. Social media reduces focus. This is just an example for the body of the paragraph. Now, the evidence studies showing reduced attention span. Now, coming to the post-writing stage. Similarly, similar to the argumentative essay where you have to revise, edit, proofread. Checking for, again, the coherence and cohesion. Ideas have to be presented cohesively and coherently within the analytical essay. Wise use of linking words or discourse markers will enhance cohesion and coherence of the essay. Then also the proofreading, sometimes even structural ambiguities may occur. So you have to make sure that the meaning conveyed is clear. And maybe you can take the help of another person who's capable of offering you suggestions to proofread the draft. Editing, again, which is required multiple times till your final draft is ready. So this is the difference. Analytical explains, right? Argumentative persuades. So in an analytical essay, how climate change affects agriculture. So you bring in a lot of evidence. It is only to show your perspective about that particular thesis statement. And that is analytical essay. But when it comes to argumentative, climate policies should be stricter. So you are trying to claim and raise this kind of a statement, make it very strong by a lot of bringing in a lot of inputs in the form of data and you try to convince the persuade the reader how and what makes these policies, what can be done to make these policies stricter. So what are the common mistakes we come across? Descriptive, that is, you end up writing as in descriptive writing instead of analytical, which is supposed to be dissected. But we end up writing in a descriptive manner, and the thesis seems to be quite weak. So this essay discusses pollution, so which is incorrect. Industrial pollution contributes to global warming through greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite strong. So analytical essays require depth, and thesis is the backbone. So here, when you talk about this analytical essay, the language of an analytical essay should not contain lame statements which do not have any supporting evidence. The author, in fact, has to present multiple perspectives on the topic, even though he or she may have a particular perspective. So in an analytical essay, the author does not attempt to influence the readers with his or her point of view. Instead, the author will present the thesis statement. Another important thing, plagiarism must be avoided. Although the authors will have to cite from other research evidence, they must be mindful not to populate the essay with quotations and paraphrased ideas. There must be a considerable amount of original ideas. So editing is also important, and at this stage, the analytical essay must have to be modified. So we are moving on to block 3. That is shortening text for future use. Now, all the while we were talking about expanding, writing in a form of an essay, descriptive, argumentative. Now comes shortening text. Right. So that is condensing the text for future use. So it is not just writing anything one reads or hears. It's a process of reviewing. Okay. So connecting and synthesizing ideas from reading. We make notes from a book. Now it is done to store information and use it in future. So we make notes from books, whereas we take notes from lectures and speeches. So here we're going to, in this block, we are going to learn about in shortening text as note making, note taking, and summarizing. So 7th unit talks about note taking, note making. The 7th unit as note making. Right. So what is note taking? So here when we talk about note making, it is nothing but we kind of make notes either from lectures or either from notes or speeches. And how does it help us? How does it help us? That is, it helps us in many ways, like understanding and simultaneously thinking about what is being read. Be selective and identify the main idea. Remember the main points that you read. Organize the ideas and establish links or connections. Plan and structure assignments. Review and revise before exams. So what are the various stages of note making? So systematic note making involves 3 stages of note making. One is before, during, after. The first stage is before. That is, before reading, write the details of the text you are reading and the date. Now, during, that is, while you read, during that, write down main points. After, that's the third stage. Reflect and review. Then organize the notes. That is, whatever you have written down, you need to review it, reflect it, then you need to organize it. Right. There are, again, when you talk about this note making, there are 2 types of note making. That is, the linear notes and the pattern notes. So what are these types of note making? So when I say linear notes, now these are the notes that are the simplest and therefore considered to be the most common style of notes, both for reading and writing. So by linear, we mean a line which indicates that notes are written down in a page, one line or after another. So the 2 common types of features used in the type of note making are numbering, indentation. Now coming to the pattern notes, make the notes more interesting and provides more scope to memorize. They are not linear and therefore they have some distinctive pattern. They are mostly represented using sketches and through illustrations, symbols, and structures. They could also be simple designs, doodles, and stick diagrams. Right. Now, there are different types of pattern notes. So the second type of notes which we are talking note making, one is linear and the pattern. Under pattern, there is a mind map, there's a tree diagram, there's a spidergram, and a matrix and a flow chart. So you find almost 5 different types of pattern diagrams. So I'm sure you all are familiar with this mind mapping, the tree diagram where there's a main branch and it is branching into tertiary branches. That's the tree diagram. Then you have the spidergram. Spidergram is somewhat like the mind map itself, but here it's slightly different. It's in fact a kind of a mind map itself, but they are linked to each other by lines. That's a spidergram. Then we have the matrix. Then the flow chart. The flow chart, of course, we all are aware of it. So one block followed by another, and with a proper arrow which leads to a next point. Next, we move on to another part of it. That is the note taking. Right. So note making and note taking are almost similar to, but yeah. So here that's condensing the text itself, right? So note taking is the process of writing down. Let me just share the slide. I hope the slide is visible. Right. So note taking is a process of writing down key points from lectures, reading, or discussions to help remember and understand information. Again, the same thing here. We have the bullet points, keyword notes, mind maps, charts and tables, digital notes. And the pattern are linear, keyword, tree diagram, table pattern, flow chart, mind map. When you talk about the linear pattern notes, written in sentences or paragraphs, see, when I give you an example, photosynthesis is the process by which plants make food using sunlight. Now, in the linear pattern note making, this is how it goes. Photosynthesis with a colon, sunlight, comma, carbon dioxide, water with the help of glucose plus oxygen. Next. Now here the tree diagram pattern, it's like branches out like a tree, like the photosynthesis requirements, process, products. Now, when you talk about the outline method, where it uses headings and subheadings with a topic, subtopic, and subtopic. Right. So the Cornell note-taking method, when you talk about it, this is unit 8, please remember, note-taking. So here in this method, as conceptualized by Dr. Walter Paul, Cornell University, New York, Walter had 5 R's in this method, namely record, reduce, recite, reflect, and review. So this is called as the Cornell note-taking method. So what are those 5 R's of Cornell? Record your notes in the right column. Reduce your notes into the recall column on the left. Recite out loud from the recall column. Reflect on the information that you are studying. Review your notes immediately and regular. So basically, it is divided into a left and a right column, where record is to the right column, reduce is to the recall column on the left. Right. So here charting method is nothing but the information is organized into tables. where it is quite useful. At a glance, you'll be able to compare and contrast the thing when you write it in a tabular form. The sentence method, and each idea is written as a sentence, useful for fast note taking. So note taking and note making are essential skills for effective learning and better understanding. The next we move on to another unit, that is summarizing. Unit 9, summarizing. So what is it basically? It is condensing information into a short and clear form, and you focus on main ideas only. So it's a gist of a text. It's a brief statement or account of the main points of a longer text. It gives an understanding to the reader what one has understood or what one has read. It is written in your own words. So a good summary is a short account of the main text, contains only and all the most important information. It is and also again, in your own words, you make it a point. Now, example of summarizing. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants use sunlight to make food and release oxygen. Next. So here, there are a few key points for summarizing. Please make it a point to learn these. There are 5 points. It has to be shorter than the original. Now, these are also called 5 R's. Reduce the length, reject the information that is not needed, reword in your own words and avoid plagiarism, express the original ideas and opinion accurately. That means reproduce the original facts and opinion, and recharge the words in lesser words. That is, compare the same meaning into lesser words. So here, reduce, reject, reword, reproduce, recharge. 5 R's again for the summarizing method. So what is the difference between them? The note taking, note making, and summarizing. Note taking, quick writing, right? You listen to a speech and you jot down certain keywords. You don't try to take it in a complete sentence, isn't it? So note taking, again, quickly listening to a speech or a lecture, you note down certain important points, and that is note taking. Note making is you read, review a literature, some sources, you gather information by noting down again keywords, that is note making, for you to learn it in future, to remember it, right? And coming to summarizing, it is nothing but a short version of the content. An elaborate content is being shortened by using the 5 R's. That is, you reduce the length, reject the information which is not needed. Sometimes there are a lot of repeated sentences or content which is not really required there. Then rewording it, then reproducing and recharging it. So when you talk about the note taking, you have to listen carefully, use bullet points, write keywords, avoid full sentences is what for note taking. When it comes to note making, use headings, highlight important points, use diagrams, make it appear very neat. And when it comes to summarizing, identify key ideas, remove unnecessary details, use your own words, keep it short. So all these 3 skills help improve understanding, memory, and exam performance. Right. So in the next session, I will be dealing with block 4 and block 5. So again, so we want the current session, we've learned about note making, note taking, and summarizing. So another way that you help you to write a summary is the skills of note making will help you in writing a summary. So in order to write a good summary, read the passage you want to summarize carefully, then underline the keywords. Make notes from the passage. Using the notes, you can prepare a draft summary. Then edit the draft summary and write the final summary. Just take a look at the following process, and whatever you have written down, you have to read it first and comprehend it, and then get a key idea about that particular passage. Then start writing it down in your own words. That is where the paraphrasing comes to use. Then reduce the length of it by removing all the repeated sentences and structures, and so on. So that's it for the session. See you in the next class, that is next Friday. That is 1st of May. Thank you. With this, we end the session.